Hello, crown defenders and unspecified genders. Welcome to Corrupted Cover Art, the program where we get a good long look at the artwork used throughout a band's discography and completely misconstrue the meaning by projecting our own unhealthy perspective of reality onto it. We haven't had any good old-fashioned heavy metal guests on the show since the first episode, when we wrapped our long, calloused arms around Cirith Ungol. So, bearing this in mind, today we'll be taking a look at the wild, wacky, and woefully catchy Brocas Helm, a California-based traditional heavy metal band who took the world by storm in the 1980s. And by the world, I mean the select individuals within the world that had reached a level of nerdiness so indomitable that they were willing to pay for something that looked like this. Like most bands, Brocas Helm didn't churn out a full-length overnight, that's more of a black metal practice. But nevertheless, their 1984 debut album is where their historical relevance really kicked into high gear. Refer to the cover art, and you will find that an eager young warrior has donned the Brocas Helm, a carefully crafted piece of armor that resembled a bucket and offered roughly the same amount of visibility that a literal bucket would have. But this bright-eyed young swordsman wasn't a very picky man, if you couldn't tell, and just like the title says, he rode into battle. This was actually my first personal exposure to the Brocas Helm when the chivalrous young knight in question located me outside of a nearby city and smashed his shield against my head after poking out my goddamn right eye. I tried to take cover behind the cheesy pulp fantasy-styled bubble lettering that was hovering ominously in front of us, but the field we met each other on was uncanny in its flatness and its lack of literally anything besides the city, so my hiding was in vain. But hey, this isn't about me. It's about the Brocas Helm and the man who wore it. As far as the music goes, Into Battle is a wonderful display of what the band Brocas Helm was capable of, with the same neoclassical and theatrical flair that would become the band's defining characteristics. This is by far their most traditional output, but they still fit plenty of personality in here. Just ask the wizard and his lady. Needless to say, a lot happened after that first album, but to make a long story short, I ran my mouth a bit more than I should have, and I got the skeleton community all riled up about this bucket-clad knight wreaking havoc on the more collagen-concentrated individuals of God's green earth. Most of the skeletons, at least the ones that I know on a personal level, responded with some grounded, rational displays of protest. Some of them banned the Brocas family from their businesses. Some of them boycotted the beach toy industry and refused to associate with buckets on any amicable level ever again. But, inevitably, some of the spooky sweethearts resorted to violence. Enter the folktale hero, Black Death. You probably recognize the name from his wilder college days when he ravished the population of mainland Europe. And while that did take place around the formative years of the actual Brocas Helm, there was no biological warfare involved in this particular encounter. No, you see, my sweet friend Black Death heard all about the bucket-shaped helmet that the knight was flaunting, and he decided to humiliate the knight with a bucket's worst enemy: sand. A bowl is only useful when it's empty. That's what they all say in the business anyway, but few will have the gall, the bravado, the sheer gusto to tell you that that same logic applies to buckets. If your bucket is filled with sand, what are you going to do with it? What can you do with it? It's a question that's plagued philosophers for centuries, if not millennia, just as it plagued the Brocas family on the Black Death cover art. Unfortunately, in a tragic display of overconfidence, Black Death was defeated by his own logic. A vessel is only useful when it's empty. But the sand he brought was already inside of a vessel, which, philosophically speaking of course, rendered that vessel completely useless. And to add insult to injury, Black Death's hat was stupid. I don't know where Black Death is these days, but he hasn't shown his face since his humiliating defeat. The album itself reflects the Brocas triumph, marking the moment when the band truly went over the top and began to add all kinds of wacky, fast-paced influences to their style, and really let the bass player go Googa mode. Shagadelic, baby. I'm trying to be as in-depth here as possible, if that wasn't already obnoxiously apparent, but I'm afraid the fate of the Brocas Helm is still somewhat hazy in my memory. I do recall that the Brocas family invited some prominent members of the skeleton community, myself included, to a private villa in Athens for a party, a get-together in which we could put the past behind us and move on as friends. But I suppose it was never meant to be. There was some conflict with the catering company's schedule. Whatever happened, the Brocas family wasn't able to satiate their immense lust for olives and salt water in a timely fashion, and things got a little out of hand. We all said some things that we'd regret. The Parthenon got obliterated into rubble. It was a lot to take in for one night. That night was the last time anybody saw the Brocas Helm. I wish I could give you a more concrete answer regarding its whereabouts, but the Greek government won't respond to my emails. Kind of like a certain somebody in my Instagram DMs. Hint, hint, Regina. Anyway, ever the separate entity from the bucket helmet, the band kept marching on and unleashed an album that was just as weird as their previous work would lead you to expect. Maybe it's because the album was written and recorded across multiple years and multiple sessions, but even when you isolate the tracks, it's still pretty goddamn weird. Defender of the Crown pits wailing, epic, high fantasy melodies right next to songs about intentionally drinking and driving, and none of it feels out of place. Or maybe it all feels out of place, but hey, Brocas Helm is consistent, if nothing else. And the Brocas Knight is too, helmeted or otherwise. He's riding along without a fear in this mortal world. And why not? He's got nothing to be ashamed of, showing his bare face. He's not some bald-headed Binding of Isaac-looking motherfucker. No. Our starry-eyed, strapping young Brocas Knight is letting his locks flow behind him as he rides, presumably to defend the crown. And while he's at it, he can defend all that you survey. Might as well. These are all pretty shallow observations, but they're satisfying enough, right? Sure, if you're employed in academia. But we take things a little more seriously here on YouTube. Defender of the Crown. But what does it need defending from? There are no clues available on the actual cover, except for the fact that the knight has his sword drawn, ready to swing at any moment. But what is he gonna do? Decapitate his horse? His intimidating, silver-clad black stallion that bears no resemblance whatsoever to the actual Brocas horse from the established canon? Why, my friends, it's time to admit to ourselves that this horse has nothing to do with the Brocas ancestry. In fact, this horse is charging at ramming speed towards the Brocas family-owned bagel shop and deli located on some undisclosed side street in Brooklyn, New York, where this esteemed family keeps their assorted heirlooms encased in a block of ice in the basement. This malicious beast must have hacked into the mainframe and acquired the coordinates of their crown, and at the first opportunity began barreling towards it in hopes of becoming an offender of the crown. But as you all know by now, these Brocas folk do their jobs well. And even though it isn't depicted, and there's no further Brocas Helm release outside of a live split with Manila Road, I think it's safe to say that the crown has been defended, and a black horse is lying headless somewhere on the outskirts of New York City right about now. Alas, unless the band decides to release more material, we have no more ground to cover. And considering the fact that the most recent original songs by the band were put out 16 years ago, I wouldn't hold my breath. They could always pull a Sirathungal and surprise us, but that's not my call to make. Though we never kissed goodbye, I'm going to end the video here anyway.